David Codrea, live from Hudson, Ohio. How you doing, David?
James, good afternoon.
You know, we're back and forth here. The crew is going back and forth. They're saying maybe we should call this particular portion Bloomberg Bloopers? Bloomberg, we're trying to work up a graphic. We're not going to have it in time. But, you know, you're keeping up with what's going on over there with the mayor, and it appears as though it's continually going downhill.
Yeah, the Mayors Against Illegal Guns, and I like to actually call it Mayors Against Your Guns, because if they had their way, all guns except the ones they control would be illegal. They have just released a report, and they've made great hoopla about it, and the press naturally is following lockstep to trumpet the findings. And what they're claiming is that they have traced crime guns, and that all these guns in states that don't have enough regulation are infesting, you know, the areas and the cities that have higher regulation, and they're somehow responsible for their crime. What goes unsaid is, why is it that in the areas of lesser regulation there seems to be lesser violent crime? What's the deal on that? They're using things like gun trace data that they get from ATF, and unfortunately the Congressional Research Services has pretty much concluded that gun trace data is a very, very unreliable tool for determining any kind of statistical conclusions with any kind of integrity, because traces aren't necessarily done for guns used in crime, and all guns used in crime are not necessarily traced. And so the bottom line is that what Bloomberg and crew are after appear to be things that are already illegal. For instance, criminals having guns, criminals selling guns across state lines. I mean, the Gun Control Act of 1968, you have to go through a dealer. You know, have prohibited persons that are so defined by law. And so there's nothing really in this that is not already against the law, and that does not illustrate how what we have doesn't work. So what makes us think that throwing more restrictions at it that are only going to affect you and I is going to have any other effect other than to further make it more difficult for you and I to have a gun?
Yeah, you know, David, number one, and you know, and I think as probably most listeners know by now, that I'm a very pro-law enforcement guy. But unfortunately, the ATF, and you and I have spoken about this before, unfortunately, the ATF has kind of lost some credibility with me based upon a number of things that you and I have talked about, but surely they have lost credibility in the reporting they're giving us about guns crossing into Mexico and how many of those guns are tracked back to the United States, blah, 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 because that research is really bad. So, you know, the ATF is not a source that I want to recommend as giving proper information out. That's my first remark.
Well, and then what happens is that information is misinterpreted. You'll recall that the media was following the lead of the gun grabber organizations and saying 90% of crime guns in Mexico come from U.S. gun shops and gun shows and things like that, when it turned out, in fact, it was 90% of the guns that Mexico reported to us, okay, which is a very different number. And we're seeing the same thing happening now with this new report from Bloomberg that said something like 22% of the guns that were recovered in crime scenes were sold within the last 2 years, the time to crime. And one station in North Carolina has already had to do a retraction because they presented it as 22% of the guns sold in North Carolina, you know, have ended up being used in crimes. And this is a great report that a colleague of mine, Paul Vallone, who is with Grassroots North Carolina and also does the Charlotte Gun Rights Examiner column, has a new column out where he takes the Bloomberg report and basically dissects it, and you can see for yourself what an unreliable thing this is to do anything except maybe use for kindling to light a nice campfire.
Yeah. So David, let me stop you right there, because I do have an email question here. Someone is asking me right now, so what if the gun was purchased within a 2-year period that ended up as a crime gun? What's the point there?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what the point of that is either. We know that guns exist, and we know that criminals are going to get guns by hook or by crook. They will steal them. Okay, we had a burglary, a couple blocks from me a couple weeks ago that made the local paper, and they stole some guns. I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to try to say that you have to disarm you and me? That's like saying we have to get rid of our money, because that's an incentive for people to rob us. So I don't know. I don't have an answer to the person who sent the email question, because I'm certainly not advocating, doing anything about it.
Yeah, I don't even understand the point of it, actually. So what's Bloomberg's point there that the gun was purchased within the last 2 years, even if it was in the same city? I mean, where are you going with that? Even if I'm a pro or an anti-gun person, how am I to interpret that as being something that's going to excite me? I don't get that part.
They use it to stir up the waters, to get hysteria, to take people who respond to sound bites. They rely on the fact that most of the media is not conversant in the gun issue, and they pretty much do what I've seen some label press release reporting, where they just repeat what people with an agenda have to say without really questioning it or understanding why. And so what we see, the fruits of this in suggestions like Frank Lautenberg, the anti-gun senator, issued a release based on this, saying, well, this shows the need to close the gun show loophole, which in code speak means to end all private sales, to get everything registered with the government, and disregarding the fact that by law, the felons and the prohibited persons don't have to register anything, because that's a violation of their right against self-incrimination.
Oh, okay. I think I got it now. Okay, all right. I think I figured it out then. This is the first step that Bloomberg is using to go forward with what you just spoke of.
He's taken many steps. This is, I would characterize this as yet another step to cloud the waters, to get his name in the paper, to advance his agenda. And again, you see the mayor of Columbus coming out and taking advantage of this and saying, well, this shows the need for cities to be able to enact their own gun control laws. Well, wait a minute. The cities are the areas typically that have the highest level of gun control, and conversely, the highest problem with gun violence. So what are you telling me? It's like Obama came out during his campaign and said, well, we have to understand that what works in Chicago doesn't work in Cheyenne. Unfortunately, we always see Chicago laws attempted to be imposed on places like Cheyenne. We never seem to see Cheyenne freedoms tried in places like Chicago. And it begs the question, just exactly what is it that works in Chicago? I haven't figured that out yet, and I don't think anybody else has either.
Right. Well, David, all I can really say to you is the Brady campaign and the mayor's office so far have not responded to our request to come on the show and defend themselves. And I'd be happy to have them come on the show to defend themselves, but they are totally ignoring any of the contact we're making with them. So
well, if you ever get them on, let me split a screen with them.
Well, we'll continue with that, and we do appreciate you bringing that. Like I said, we're going to come up with something like the Bloomberg Bloopers or the Brady Bunch, or we'll have some fun with it, because so far I haven't seen anything that isn't ridiculous out of those campaigns.
And we know that if Bloomberg has its way, James, you just sent me the story about all the celebrities who have their gun permits in New York, and not being Robert De Niro or Donald Trump, I don't think you or I would qualify.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the reason why we're not doing a show in New York. We're in California. I don't know if that's any better or any worse, but anyway, hey, thank you. I appreciate you coming on, David. We'll see you again next week.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, James.